This is Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Mem Dalid, and we're holding on Mem Gimel Amid Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. Va'amar Rav Yossi Rav Chanina Mai Taima de Rav Yechanan. What is the reasoning of Rav Yechanan? Rav Yechanan was disputed Reish Lakish as to whether the machlokes is only by Gerushin or also by Kiddushin. Reish Lakish said, "Machlokes beGerushin, kach machlokes beKiddushin," and Rav Yechanan said, "No, they only argue by Gerushin." But now everyone's wondering what's going on if you didn't just finish learning the previous daf like myself. Says, so let's remind ourselves what's going on over here is, says Rav Yechanan, machlokes beGerushin, but Kiddushin divrei hakol what? Avia v'lohi. We're talking about a naira accepting Kiddushin. Says the Gemara, says Rav Yechanan. Says Rav Yechanan when it comes to, sorry, I just chopped off the top of my head. There we go. Says Rav Yechanan when it comes to Gerushin, that's where there is a machlokes whether she herself could accept the Gerushin. But when it comes to Kiddushin, divrei hakol and naira, only the father can accept Kiddushin and not her. Says the Gemara, why? Why, when it comes to Kiddushin, is it just by the father, according to Rav Yechanan? Says the Gemara, Aliba, my time Rav Yechanan, leave the Rabbanan, because we're arguing within the Rabbanan. Gerushin, the machneses atzma l'rishus aviyah. Gerushin, what does Gerushin do? Gerushin makes her severed from her husband, which does what for this child, this 12 and a half year old? Brings her back to the rishus of her father. Therefore, beini ubein aviyah, whether she or her father is able to be the one to accept the Gerushin. Kiddushin, when it comes to Kiddushin, which is doing what? It's removing her from her, and there went the daf, excuse me. It's removing her from her father's rishus. Therefore, aviyah v'lohi. The father is the only one that could be the one to accept the Kiddushin for this young girl. Asks the Gemara, 1 second. V'harei maimer. What about maimer? In the last Rashi, the Amid keys us in and reminds us, what's maimer? Kiddushay yavan bi'ev himtai. Maimer is when a yavam is awaiting yibum. Before yibum, it's just maimer, which is Kiddushin derabanan, which in essence is just a way of designation that this yavam is going to go to this yavama. So when it comes to maimer, the mafkaz atzm rishus aviyah, which as well is a form of bringing her out from her father's rishus, because after her husband died, before the brother does yibum, she really is in her father's rishus. And yet, what do we see? Utinan, and we learned in a Mishnah as we turn over to Mem Dalid Amid Aleph, Kitana Mina Irisin. If we have a Kitana from Irisin, Allah is Ein Oisin Ba Maimer Ela Midas Aviyah. She's only able to perform Maimer with the knowledge, with the das of her father. Vehanaira, that's a Kitana. But a naira, girl that's already 12 to 12 and a half years old, bein midas atzma, bein midas aviyah. She could do it by herself or with her father. So asks the Gemara, we see when it comes to Maimer that even though she's leaving the father's rishos, she is still able to effect the Maimer on her own, and she does not meet the father. So the svara that we explained for Rav Yechanan, which was that when it comes to Kiddushin, which is leaving the father, that the father has to do, we see is not a valid svara. Ella, says the Gemara, 4 lines down, Mem Daled Amid Aleph. Itmar hachi itmar, you have to say as follows. Rav Yossi Rav Chanina, my time of the Rav Yechanan. Says Rav Yossi Rav Chanina was Yisrael Rav Yechanan, I'll leave it there. This is the second reason. Kiddushin d'meidaita aviyah v'lo hi gerushin t'bal karcha beini ben aviyah. The classical chilik between Kiddushin and Gerushin. Kiddushin, you need her das. Therefore, it goes by the father and not herself. But Gerushin, since it can be done Baal Karcha, since she can get divorced against the woman's will, Bein Aviyah, either one can accept the Gerushin. Asks the Gemara, Hare Maimer, what are you going to say when it comes to Maimer? Again, the Midaita that needs das. Vikatani, and according to what you just said, and again to explain that if we were to need das, that's why we need the father's das. You would think, what do you mean if it needs das, then it needs the kids? No, because she's a child. So if it needs das, that's why Aviyah v'loyi. But says the Gemara, what about Maimer? Answers the Gemara, Asam b'Maimer d'Bal Karcha v'Rebihi Maimer. Even though it's a form of Kiddushin, but as we explained, it's a form of designation between the Yavam and the Yavama. There's a unique halacha according to Rebbe, the Maimer could be done Bal Karcha. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa we've seen together in Yavamis, way back at the beginning of Nashin, which by the way, as we conclude Kiddushin in, a little bit more than a month, we'll be concluding all of Nashin b'siyata d'shmaya. If someone performs an act of Maimer without her das, Rebbe Yomer Kana v'Chamar V'Loi Kana. My time of the Rebbe, where did Rebbe get that there'll be a kinyan on Maimer even without her das? Gamar mi bia diavama, learns that from bia v'yavama that what? A unique halacha ma bia diavama, one could acquire the yavama via an act of bia. And there's a unique form of bia that is applicable, which is the Baal Karcha. My bia diavama Baal Karcha, avachanami Baal Karcha. For Rabbanan, they argue about this din of Maimer Baal Karcha. They hold Savri Alfina mi Kiddushin. They equate Maimer more like Kiddushin, not like bia of yavama. Ma Kiddushin demi daita avachanami demi daita. B'mai komifligi. Now, just to remind yourselves, we're a bit of a tangential piece over here, trying to figure out a sidebar machlekes regarding Maimer, but once we're in the topic, says the Gemara, what is this machlekes? Rebbe Sava, Rebbe holds, and I believe we have the carbon copy Gemara in Kiddush, in Yavamis. Mili di Yavama, mi Yavama, havle melaf. Rebbe holds it's a Yavama sugya, so learn it out from Yavama. For Rabbanan and Zavri, no, Kiddushin mi Kiddushin, havle melach. Says the Gemara, Hachi nami mistavra. Now this is mistavra. Now what is mistavra? If you just ran through the stop sign like I just did, you would think it's going in the way we just explained the machlekes Rebbe and the Chachamim, but that is not accurate. Hachi nami mistavra is going back on Rav Yochanan, as Rashi keys us in the Hadik Getani Game Maimer Beini Bein Aviyah B'Maimer Al Karcha Kai Aval B'Shar Kiddushin Aviyah V'Lohi Ki Rav Yochanan. That when it comes to Kiddushin, we're going with Rav Yochanan that only the father could accept it and not she herself. And therefore the difference between Kiddushin and Gerushin. Hachinam mistavra, why? Because Rav Yochanan. As Rav Yochanan explains, Miktani Seifa, Mashen Kain B'Kiddushin. Because Rav Yochanan clearly is differentiating between this and Kiddushin. Asks the Gemara, Elanema Tavitev Teresh Lakish. If it's a raya to Rav Yochanan, then what does that mean? That means it's a kasha and Reish Lakish. So why don't you just articulate this as a kasha and Reish Lakish who says that we have the same din both by Kiddushin and by Gerushin, that bein Aviyah could accept the Gerushin or the Kiddushin. Amr l'cha Reish Lakish responds, Amani Rav Yehuda, Amar ein shtei yadayim zoichais. The Reish Lakish is going within Rav Yehuda. The two hands can have one acquisition. Rav Yehuda Masha Enkein B'Kedushin, Masha Enkein B'Gerushin Mi Bayilei. Says Gemara, you're right. The wording in the Mishnah is not precise. Ein Holchanami. But I did on a Maimer to Dami L'Kedushin, Dami Nami Masha Enkein B'Kedushin. So it comes a little bit of a tichoy in the Mishnah, but that's how the Gemara reads. For Rav Yehuda, says the Gemara, so what are we coming out with over here? We're coming out that according to Reish Lakish, when it comes to Maimer, both he or Aviyah can accept the Maimer, can accept the Kiddushin. Whereas when it comes to regular Kiddushin, regular Gerushin, it's only the father. So says the Gemara, 5 lines from the white lines, for Rav Yehuda, why do we make this differentiation? Maishna Maimer, that what? It can be done by both she or the father. Seemingly the reason is because Maimer is in a situation of Yibum. Yibum, there's a Zika, there's a connection between the Yavam and the Yavam. So says the Gemara, that's why we think Maimer specifically she can accept unto herself. But Hasha, Das is La'achi, if you're going to explain as such, then Rav Yochanan Nami loy take Shilacha. We don't have a kasha Rav Yochanan Meikara. Why? Because this answer we could have used at the very beginning of today's shiur. Shiny Maimer, Hoil, Uzkuka, Ve'oi, Medes. And that's how the Gemara concludes, end of part 1 of today's shiur. Says the Gemara, let's delve a little bit deeper. Reish Lakish argued on Rav Yochanan, and Reish Lakish held Bein Kiddushin, Bein Gerushin. This was on the bottom of Mem Gilum and Beis. Reish Lakish, which ended off yesterday's shir and started off today's shir, said Kamachleikis the Gerushin, Kach Machleikis the Kiddushin, Ein Shtei Yadayim Zoiches Ke'achad. Excuse me. Kamachleikis the Gerushin Kach Machleikis the Kiddushin, and says Reish Lakish. Yes. Says Reish Lakish, he ve'aviyah mekablin eskita, whereas Rav Yehuda says in shtei yadayim zeiches kechad, and Reish Lakish says the same machlekes. So again, the shita of the Chachamim, according to Reish Lakish, is, as we said originally, I'm sorry that I confused myself, he ve'aviyah mekablin both Gittin and Kiddushin. So Tanan asks the Gemara 2 lines from the wide lines. Mem Dalid Amid Aleph from our Mishnah. And of course, this really is where the whole Gemara was going to. Because if you look back on Mem Gimel Beis, we had 2 dots. We started off Tanan Hasam, and we went into Naira Marasa, Hivaviyam Makalan Eskita. Omachlekes Tanakama Rabban and Rav Yehuda. Omachlekes Reish Lakish Rav Yochanan. A lengthy segue, today's Amud Aleph, dealing with what sheet does Rav Yochanan. Now, says the Gemara, let's go for a circle. We have our Mishnah that says, Ish Mekadosh B'Tik Shinaira, Bai Ubeshluchai. She herself, or her Shliach. Bai Ubeshluchai in, Ba Ubeshlucha, like. Excuse me. He could accept it by himself or with his Shliach, but she cannot. Tiyufta de Reish Lakish, because we see clearly she cannot accept it on her own. It has to be only the father. Amlacha Reish Lakish answers Reish Lakish, that's not a kasha. Ha-nami Rav Yehudi. Ask the Gemara, really? Yomimas is much like Rav Yehuda? Is it Hashet to say that our Mishnah Shita Rav Yehuda Vakatani Seifa? The end of our Mishnah said, Aymer Leisha Skachli B'Tamara Zu. This is the next Mishnah, at the end of our Mishnah. So it says to a woman, marry me with this Tamar, this date. Hiskachli Bezu. V'arminan man Tana Skachi, and who is the Tana of the next Mishnah of Amar Rava? It's Rav Shimoni. The Amar at Shemer Shvuah L'chol Echad V'Echad. V'teitem Akula Rav Yehuda B'Prati. So like Rav Shimon, if you're going to tell me that no, really we're going with Rav Yehuda, and regarding this case, he goes with Rav Shimon. Omi Savarla, but it's not true. V'atanya, we learned in our Braisa Zaklal. Einay Chayav Alachas. Prat Chayva Kolachas Vachas Devira Meir Rav Yehuda Aimer. That means Prat, if you specify in each and every one, then each one has its own din, its own shvuah. Therefore you chayv in each and every one. Whereas Rav Yehuda Aimer shvuah loylach Chayva Kolachas Vachas. Rav Elazar Aimer loylach v'loylach. Then shvuah Chayva Kolachas Vachas. Rav Shimon Aimer loylam min Chayva Shaimer shvuah Kolachad Vechad. So we have 4 different opinions in the world of a shvuah. But clearly, Rav Yehuda, who's opinion number 2, doesn't hold like Rav Shimon, who's opinion number 4. So says the Gemara, we have a problem. Because the next Mishnah introduces Rav Shimon. So how could Rav Yehuda hold like Rav Shimon if he doesn't hold like Rav Shimon? Ella, kula Rav Shimon, he suggests the Gemara. So we flip it the other way. That really everyone holds a Rav Shimon, klape, bezu, which is going to be the next Mishnah. But with regard to shlichos, he holds like Rav Yehuda. And that's how the Gemara is going to conclude, and therefore it's not going to be a kasha on Rav Yehuda from the next Mishnah of Rav Shimon, because Rav Shimon is going to go backwards on Rav Yehuda. So says the Gemara, Rav Asi, loy ol lebei Jasha. One day Rav Asi didn't come to yeshiva Ashkel Rav Zera. He found Rav Zera Amarle, my Amara in the Beit Midrash. What do they learn today in yeshiva? Amar le Avinu I also didn't go to yeshiva. Everyone's playing hooky today. Rav Avinu dial. Rav Avin went. Amar and Rav Avin said, Chavrusa kula k'Rav Yochanan. And Rav Yochanan and Rav Avin they said, V'amar Chavrusa kula k'Rav Yochanan. Everyone said like Rav Yochanan. V'tzavach Reish Lakish ki krochia. And Reish Lakish started screaming. So this is what that day in the Beis Medrash was this machlekes. The machlekes Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan. Who Lamais is right. So everyone said like Rav Yochanan. And Reish Lakish started screaming, what do you mean? V'yatza v'ha'isa. How are you differentiating between Kiddushin and Gittin? Yatza v'ha'isa. V'leka dash chabei. And no one listened to the screaming of Reish Lakish. So Amar Le said Rav Asi, that's conversing with Rav Zera, Rav Avin, Bar Smachu. Could Rav Avin be relied upon? Normally in Kiminyama Latigni. He can be relied upon like catching his fish from the sea, putting it right into a frying pan, meaning he remembers everything perfectly. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Rav Yitzchak, Hana, Loi Rav Avin, Rav Chia, V'lo Rav Avin Bar Kahana, El Rav Avin Stam, L'mayin Afkamina, L'mirma Didei Adidei. If you ever want to ask a stira, you have to know which Rav Avin it was Rav Avin Stam. But L'mais the Gemara is concluding that everyone wants the opinion of Rav Yochanan. Why we're not bothered by Reish Lakish's kasha of V'yatza v'haisa. The Gemara doesn't deal with right now, but that is L'mais the Machskana, seemingly like the opinion of Rav Yochanan. Continues the Gemara. Rava mi Rav Nachman, as we turn over to Mem Dalid Amid Beis. Rava asks from Rav Nachman the following: Naira ma'u shetas shliach lekabel gita miyad baila. Can a naira, can she make a shliach to accept a get from her husband? Kiyad ovia damya, oy kechatzer ovia damya. Is the naira considered like the hand of her father, like the chatzar of the father? So the Tab Rashi keys us in that we're going back in the Shita of the Rabbanan that said Mekabel says Kita that she can accept her own get. So says the Gemara, she could accept her own get, but is she able to make someone else accept her get? When the Rabbanan said she herself could accept it, is that because she's considered the Aviyah? And therefore she can make a shliach, or she considered a chatzar. Says the Gemara, third line down, Mem Dalam Amid Beis. Kiyad Aviyah Damya, Maviyah Mashri Shliach Avinami Mashri Shliach. Is she just like the hand of the father, just like the father can make a shliach? She could do the same. Oidil Makeh Chatzar Aviyah Damya. And until the guy reaches her hand, she's not divorced. Says the Gemara, Rava. This was a kasha on the bottom of Amid Aleph that was posed from Rava to Rav Nachman. Asks the Gemara, was Rava really misupik about this? V'amar Rava, but Rava himself taught us in Gittin. Ksav gevin asa biyadav, toyi yoshin mishmar toyin. You watch the Avid who's sleeping. Hare is a get, that is a good get. Neir, if the Avid is waking a get. Neir, am I in a get? Why is that a good get? If you put the get in the hand of the Avid, and the Avid is awake. Because it's a chatzar that's watched without her das. If you're going to tell me, if you're going to tell me that she herself has the status of being her father's chatzar, so then even if the get reached her own hand, it shouldn't work. Why? Because then it's considered a chatzar that's being watched without the das of the father. And if the whole nikuda would have been the reason why it doesn't work is because you need das of the father, then it will not work even if it's in her hand. So it proves the Gemara that according to Rava, seemingly he already answered the shayla that she is not considered the chatzar of the father, but rather the father herself. And therefore, seemingly the same thing, she should be able to make a shliach. Ela la'olam, says Gemara Pshitalei, tchiyad aviyah damya. So it's clear that Rava held that she herself is considered the yad, the hand of the father. And this was Rava's kasha to Rav Nachman. Mi ilema kiyad aviyah l'shavi ihi shliach oiloi. So Rava's kasha was, it's true. She has the status of her father. But is she mamish like the father, that just like the father could make a shliach, she could do the same? Or maybe she's like the father, but not with the same powers as the father. Amar lei, to this, Rav Nachman responds to Rava, ein oise shliach. Lamaisa, she might be the status of the Yadaviyah, but it's not powerful enough to make a shliach. Eisvei asks the Gemara now, which Rav Nachman just said. Ketana she'amra eskabali gita, but Ketana says, except for me a get, ve'in a get, achigia get liyada. If a Ketana said to someone else, except for me a get, what's the halacha? Ein a get, achigia get liyada. Ha naira. But let's say it was not a Ketana, it was a naira. Then Hariz a get. Then the halacha is, it is a good get. So asks the Gemara, we see now like Rav Nachman. We're discussing a case of iskabali giti. We're discussing a case of someone making a shliach. And what do we see? We see that by a naira, Hariz a get. That was Rava's kasha to Rav Nachman. Rava asked, if you look at the top line, naira ma'u shetas shliach. L'kabel gita miyad b'haylo. Rav Nachman responded, no, he's a shliach. But we see clearly that he could. Answers the Gemara. What's going on over here? In this brayso, which says that naira harizeget is only in a case in which she has no father, and that's when she can accept, and that's when she can make a shliach. Ask Gemara 1 second. The seif of that brayso says, say if her father says, go out, V'kabel get libiti and accept to get from my daughter. Emrata ba'al lachzer boy lo yachzer. So from the sefer, we're discussing a case where the fathers are out. Mechlal the reisha b'deish lo'avas kinon. So seemingly we want to assume that the reisha is the same. Usually, if the sefer is discussing a case where the fathers are alive, we assume the reisha is the same. Answers the Gemara. Chasurei mechzera v'hachiketani. There's words missing in the brayso. Kedana shamres kabaligiti. For Kedana said, except for me a get. Halachas ain't a get, achi a get liyada. It's not a good get until the get reaches her hand. Ho naira, raise a get. Bamedivarim amurim. This is the part that we add into the brayso. Kishein lo av. Aval yesh lo av. If she has a father from Raviyah, and the father said, and this is here the Mishnah continues. Say the kabbalah bitigita v'rata balachzor. Loy yachzar. So kasha and a teret with a class called Chasiri Mechsra B'Hachi Katani. And we begin a new sugya, about 12 lines from the white lines, regarding a naira accepting Kiddushin. Says the Gemara Itmar. Ketana sheniskacho shaloi ledas aviyah. We have a ketana that was niskacho without the intent, without the das of the father. Amar Shmuel sricha get usricha mion. Shmuel says an interesting halacha. She needs a get because Lamaisa, she was at some level married. So before she gets married to someone else, she needs to get a get. And utricha mion. And she needs mion, which we'll see. Mion is that she is a Kiddushin of a ketana. Where she walks out of the marriage, we'll see what's going on over here. Oma Karna, that's his name. Devarim bigu. There are words inside what just happened. Im get lama mion. Im mion lama get. Something here is funny. Because if there's a get, that means there was a marriage. So then why are we doing mion? Mion means you could just walk out of the marriage because it was kedushay katan, which you just let her walk out of. And if there's a mion, then why do you need get? So what exactly is going on over here? So Amri Leis, they said to Karna, explaining the statement of Shmuel as follows: Hamar Ukva ubeitina de Kafri of Chua. Bar Ukva and Beizdin of Kafri, they wanted to figure out what Shmuel meant. So what do they do? Of Chua Shadru lekamei de Rav. So they switched around these words and they sent it to Rav. Again, they did this often to make sure that the person they're sending to will not be skewed and swayed by the opinions and who says what. So they would switch it around, make believe that he said something else, to hear what really Rav held. So Amar Leho, and Rav responded, Ha'alekim, Lashon of a Shavua. Sricha get usricha mion. Meaning, they sent the Keilu as if Shmuel said, you do not need a get, you do not need mion. And Rav responded, so Elikim, just like Shmuel said, you need a get and mion. V'chasle lezara. And he Yishev Rachmanis to the offsprings, the Abba of Abba, referring to Shmuel, Bar Abba, Dinei Mahachi, that he seemingly said what? That you don't need get and you don't need me. And of course he didn't actually say that, but that's what Rav said. So now that Rav concurs with Shmuel, says the Gemara, why? And with this we conclude, V'tayim amai. Well, Lamaisa is the reason according to Rav and according to Shmuel you need to get him in. Amar Rav Acha B'Rei Rav Yikos Richa get. Shem and Isra'atzav, B'Kiddushin. Maybe the father wanted the Kiddushin, thereby solidifying the Kiddushin, and now you need to get a get. Otzricha miyon, why? Shem aloin Isra'atzav, maybe the father didn't want the Kiddushin. V'yoimru in Kiddushin, toivsim be'achoisa. And there's Xer D'Rabbanan, that in such a scenario, that we don't want someone just to walk out of a marriage, because then people are going to get concerned about other cases in Kiddushin, toivsim be'achoisa. So what do we say? We say you need to do miyan. We'll stop over here. I'll pick it up from Rav Nachman in the next year. B'siyata Dishmaya.